Democrats are desperately trying to build a new narrative in order to try to capture market share before we head into the 2026 midterm elections. What's happening right now is they're trying to blame all of the financial problems Trump inherited on Trump as if it's his fault. They're trying to blame the entire stock market pullback on Trump, the high gas prices on Trump, the high egg prices on Trump. But as you'll see, gas prices are coming down, egg prices are coming down, and new government data out has the market jumping today. To help me go through all of this, I have Charles Gasparino. Charles, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So just some background. Charles Gasparino is a New York Times bestselling author, veteran Fox Business financial journalist, and the author of Go Woke, Go Broke. I've been reading in the final months before the presidential election, President Biden authorized the release of hundreds of billions of dollars in order to prop up the messaging for Kamala Harris that the U.S. economy was booming. Now Donald Trump is being saddled with that debt, the expectation that government spending was going to continue, and now he's being blamed. Do you have any insight on this story, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I actually broke that story today, or on March 12th.
Okay.
This is going to run, I'm assuming, in a few days, right? And
no, it's running today.
It's running today. Okay, so I broke it today. Yeah, I mean, listen, I've been asking for a little bit of an autopsy on, what the Trump administration has been, saddled with, aside from just all the bizarre spending, the trans dance festivals in Bangladesh. You can laugh at that, but there's some real serious stuff here. This was a rumor during the campaign that people thought for sure. I mean, there was several rumors that Biden was flooding the nation with immigrants, illegal immigrants, to essentially push down wage rates as we had persistent inflation. The other thing was that they were spending more money than was necessary, just trying to essentially prop up the economy and the markets by doing this massive amounts of spending to try to get Kamala Harris elected, and basically by essentially hiding it by rolling over debt, short-term debt, so you wouldn't have to issue 10-year bonds and 30-year bonds, which would gap out the sort of 10-year interest rates and 30-year interest rates, particularly the 10-year interest rate, which is where all the consumer rates are pegged off. So if you had a 5% 10-year rate during the election, you would have probably had a market collapse given how much they were spending. So what they would do is just simply roll over the short-term debt. And from what I'm hearing from inside the Biden administration, from the Trump people, is they think there was like tens of billions. The number that I was told was anywhere from 250 to 320 billion dollars. I mean, it's in this sort of massive range. The last sort of last few months that was just massive amounts of spending that essentially programs on overdrive. And don't ask me which programs. It's just it's pretty clear to them that they sort of put the pedal to the metal, and it obviously didn't work. But now, if you think about it, Trump is saddled with a $2 trillion budget deficit. By the way, that's almost unheard of given the type of economic landscape we have. We do, if you look at headline numbers, unemployment's very low. GDP is growing at 2 or 3%. Where that was like, I think it was the last print for the Biden administration. Check me on that, but it was in that range. You're not supposed to be, ballooning out deficits when you have economic growth like that. The last pre-COVID year of the Trump administration was 980 billion. So we're talking like more than double that. Back then Trump had 2.5% growth. So you're not supposed to get have this type of growth and that type of deficit. So there's something obviously happened, and it ain't good. And so this is just one of the problems that Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary, Donald Trump as president, is stuck with. It's really quite remarkable that the media is going nuts on tariffs, and I'm not a huge fan of tariffs, but this economy has structural issues that go beyond Trump, threatening Mexico for to stop sending fentanyl, or else we're going to tax, Mexican cars. There's structural problems here with debt. I mean, we have a massive public sector spending that overwhelmed with the private sector. And, he's trying to equalize, bring all this stuff into equilibrium, so to speak. Trade is one of those things he's trying to bring into equilibrium. Again, I'm not a big fan of trade wars, but when I started looking at some of the tariffs that Mexico and Canada put on us and what we do to them, it's not exactly a level playing field. Certainly not a level playing field with China. But you're not getting this from the mainstream media, which is just going nuts on the markets. The markets are going. All of a sudden, like, the New York Times is like wickedly into the markets. I mean, I mean, it's just really amazing. By the way, the markets went up pretty handsomely for 4 years, while working class people who were not involved in the markets, took it. And, they were forced with, all the spending that Biden did may have propped up the markets, but it also stoked inflation. And that's a middle class, that's a very regressive tax on working and middle class Americans who couldn't really speculate their way out of, like rich people can trade stocks. They're in hedge funds. They're in all these sort of investment vehicles that outpace inflation. Most people aren't. They have 401ks, but they don't have that much in there. They also can't touch them. If they're retirees and they're taking it out, what they're taking out, even though it's propped up by the market, gets eaten up by inflation. You see what I'm saying? It's not a level playing field here. So again,
didn't Biden promise to ignore the wealthy and grow the middle class from the bottom up and out? And what he really did was he shrunk that, drained all the money, and then gave all the wealth to the top through the markets.
I think what he did was he gave the wealthy the money through the markets. There were transfer payments to poor people and to migrants. Migrants came to this country and got like debit cards, or whatever. I mean, if you think about it, a migrant comes to this country and we let them in. Where do they, who pays for their health care? I mean, who pays for their schooling? I mean, it's all part, they sort of tap in to the broader welfare state that is basically paid for by most middle class people. It was pretty cynical all the way around. Another thing is, I mentioned before, the whole notion that to get inflation down, to take wages down, they flooded the zone with migrants. Well, think about that. To get inflation down, wage inflation down, they basically taxed the healthcare system of this country because all these migrants don't have. I mean, you don't come here if you're a migrant from Venezuela with healthcare and money in the bank. You have nothing. Listen, I'm not saying there's anything. These are great people. They work hard, but as Milton Friedman said, you can't have open borders and a welfare state. And the money comes from somewhere. Obviously, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have no clue about Milton Friedman, or else they wouldn't have done what they did. So Donald Trump has a really difficult job ahead. I kind of wish he started not with tariffs, but with the positive part of his agenda, get those tax cuts through, start with deregulation and then slowly work towards the tariff. But, I'm not in the White House. He's got smart people around him, and they took on tariffs first. I also wonder, and, all this market freak out about tariffs, is Trump really going to go for a global trade war? Or is this just, we're going to threaten certain people, we're going to pull back when we have to? And, at some point, the markets are going to get used to this, where they're not going to freak out so much. They're going to know that this is a negotiating tactic and that, things are going to equalize. So I would just say, before you sort of settle in and attack Trump as an economic failure after being in office for 5 weeks, let's all take a deep breath. The markets are signaling some nasty things. There's no doubt. They're signaling a recession. They're signaling, problems with trade and stuff like that. None of that is easy to deal with, but a lot of this stuff was baked in. Here's something interesting. The markets, as we're I always freak out. I'm on this email train with these people, and they're always crying about the markets. You know, they're liberals from the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and they're always like, the markets. And I always say, whenever I write the word markets, I put markets, triple exclamation point, because they are really screaming about the fact that they're making less money than they made last month, and they're super rich. We should point out that the markets themselves were inflated by like 5 or 6 stocks. Those were the big AI tech names that, you know, needed to correct. You know, the tariff issue became the trigger point for that correction. It would probably be something else, by the way. The economy was not doing great during Biden's last couple of months in office. Inflation was still high. There were underlying signs of slower growth. You could see it. I mean, it's one of the reasons why Trump got elected. So, you know, this economy was kind of getting in bad shape, and it was ripe for what we're seeing now in many ways.
I want to tell you about today's video sponsor. When it comes to money, I've tried to show you a better way to do your mortgage. I've encouraged you to have life insurance. I've talked to you about the value of owning the market by investing in the S&P 500, Dow Jones, or QQQ. I've even told you about putting some of your wealth in gold to be outside of the US dollar fiat machine. Being smart with your money is paramount to a good future. However, it's also important to be ahead of the curve and get into companies before they get big. For example, with Trump's pro-growth energy policies and Elon Musk's solar vision, America is gearing up to lead in AI and crypto, power-hungry sectors needing sustainable energy. SolarBank Corporation is stepping it up, blending a decade of solar expertise with a planned pivot into data centers. SolarBank has powered over 10,000 homes, inked deals with giants like Honeywell, and grown revenue 58 times in 10 years, hitting $58 million in fiscal 2024 with a 28% margin. In fact, since Trump won, their stock has gone up over 100%, but recently it's pulled back. This could be a good thing for you. While SolarBank's current asset base is 32 megawatt operation, it has a pipeline of 1,256 megawatt in development, 40 times its existing operating asset. SolarBank, under ticker symbol SUUN on the NASDAQ exchange, understands that energy is currency and solar energy is the future. The world runs on energy, and the future will need even more of it. So do yourself a favor and research SolarBank today to learn more and understand the risk and opportunity. I'll make sure to leave a link down below. I feel like there's, I mean, obviously the country is very divided, but I have friends that vote Democrat. I have friends that vote Republican. The Republicans tell me Trump's doing an amazing job. They don't blame him for high gas prices, high egg prices. They seem okay with the market correction.
Prices of eggs are going down now, though. You should know.
Yeah. Of course, you know, he gets blamed when they went up, even though they killed 100 million chickens under Biden. But
right.
My Democrat friends say this guy can't keep a promise. He's screwing up America. Who cares about the national debt? I'm worried about my stocks. Why are we seeing Trump so differently? Is it just based on who we voted for and therefore we defend our vote?
Yeah, I mean, there's some of that. Listen, I try to play this straight, just so you know. I'll tell you what I think and where this is going. We should point out that Trump is doing exactly what he ran on. I don't see where there's a lie in the tariff stuff. There's a lie in cutting government size of government. There's a lie in deporting migrants. Where's the lie in sending this idiot protester from the Palestinian protester back home on a student visa when Trump promised he'd do that if you incited violence on campus? I mean, it's right there. Or at least led protests. I guess there's two ways of looking at what this guy did. Did he incite violence, or did he just do a protest? Either way, if you're deemed a problem and you're here on a green card, you could be sent back, and Trump promised that. So I'm not quite sure where he lied. And in terms of the debt, I don't care about the debt. I only care about my 401k now. I mean, that's such a really short-sighted. I mean, your kids are going to care about the debt. And here's the thing, and this debt thing would have hit us probably pretty hard now if Kamala Harris was elected. The 10-year yield was moving up to 5% for a lot of reasons, including how much debt we were spending. I mean, we're at like some astronomical levels now. We're at $2 trillion deficit. We had $3 trillion during the COVID lockdown. So that may sound good because it was 3 and now it's 2. But take that out. I mean, that was like some weird experiment with shutting down the entire economy. Of course, you're going to get $3 trillion. You're not supposed to get $3 trillion. This thing should be below $1 billion. It actually should be 500 billion and below that. It'd be nice to get it balanced one of these days. That is unsustainable, and it's going to lead to higher interest rates. And once you have interest rates on the 10-year that hit 5%, you do see really bad stuff happen because all consumer rates are pegged off of that. You could see a very steep recession. So remember, debt does matter. How you deal with it, we're gonna have to take our, I guess he could push it off to JD Vance as becomes president. But man, that would be a horrible thing to do, just to keep saddling future generations with this. And there's a kind of a way to have your cake and eat it too. He thinks the tariffs will help pay down the deficit. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I believe that part of his equation. I do believe that there's a lot of pro-growth in his economic plan of tax cuts and deregulation that could get the economy going and growing. I do know when you cut the size of government, making it more efficient, there is a cutback in GDP from that because government spending is part of GDP. But there's also when you infuse the private sector, make the government sector, it doesn't crowd out as much as the private sector investing. Well, guess what? That helps the economy and that should grow GDP. So there's a lot of good things here. I still maintain we dodged a bullet with him compared to what we were getting, which would, in my view, would have been very devastating. People who just had no clue. Think about how crass that is. We're going to bring in 14 million illegal immigrants to flood school systems, health systems, so we can get down the wage rate on low-end jobs. I mean, that's nuts.
Well, I think that's one thing that Trump's trying to do. And he has had success in these first 5 weeks where, look how many companies and banks and even American companies are saying, we're going to invest hundreds of billions of dollars. We're going to create jobs.
There you go. His policies have these growth aspects to them that aren't being fully appreciated.
And I think in Trump's first term, he was very concerned about the stock market all the time. Look at the markets. You can thank me for your 401k. He would say that regularly. This time he's saying, wait a minute. None of that matters if the country falls apart. None of that matters if the dollar isn't strong. None of that matters if the American empire isn't safe for investments and companies and workers. And so now you see Japan dumping money in. You've got local companies. So I feel like it's just a different strategy, but it's going to take time. No ship can be turned around immediately. I do think, you've brought up Kamala a couple of times. They spent almost $2 billion trying to get her elected. She ends up $20 million in debt. But then on the government side, Biden is basically draining the American taxpayer, pumping hundreds of billions of dollars into making her look good. Seems very unfair, right? And yet with all of that, Trump ends up winning the popular vote and the electoral college. Do you think, moving into your book, I believe a big reason that Trump was elected was the DEI stuff, the woke stuff, the transgender push on children through school systems. Have you been surprised by the positive reception of the changes he's made, as well as the backlash from left-leaners?
Well, I always said I found it hard to believe Kamala Harris was going to get elected because she's so woke. And she would say, I am the wokest president. We need more woke. And I was like, well, based on my reporting, woke is being rejected by consumers left and right. If it's not Budweiser with Dylan Mulvaney in their ads, the trans woman activists, that was sipping a Budweiser, Bud Light, naked or half naked, whatever she was. I can't unsee that commercial in a bubble bath. That Disney has had problems. Their stock price hasn't, moved in 10 years as they went woke. And Target, had endless pride celebrations. By the way, why does Target think it's incumbent upon them to do a Pride Month celebration? A month. We have one day for the president, right? We have President's Day, a month to celebrate.
1 day for moms.
1 day for moms, 1 day for dads, a month for some celebrating a sexual identity. I mean, it's like nuts. And the country has moved against that, and Trump tapped into that pretty astutely. I will say this though, there is a recognition. I think Trump is much more self-aware this time around. I mean, he knows that things must have been really bad for him to get reelected. I never thought he was going to get reelected. I never thought he was going to win the Republican primary after January 6th. I was very skeptical. I thought DeSantis would have been a better candidate. But he did a couple things. I mean, first off, the Democrats set him up. Essentially, the lawfare they performed against him through people like Alvin Bragg and Fonnie Willis, and you name it. The people in Letitia James. There was a backlash to that, so people rallied around Trump, and then so they got what they wanted. They wanted to run against Trump. They thought he had the biggest negatives. I did too. And then what was interesting is that the country clearly was on a wrong path economically. People understood. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris kept saying there was, the economy's great, transitory inflation, and people would look at their paychecks and they can't make ends meet. I mean, I go to a lot of high-end restaurants. They're not complaining because they sell Sasakaya at whatever it is, $300 a bottle. A friend of mine owns a diner. It's hard for him to make it with the high cost of stuff, and he's got a very low price point that he can't raise just because his clientele is working class. So there was two economies out there, and I think Trump's realizes that he didn't get. Part of the reasons why he got elected was not just because of him. It was a rejection of what was. And I think because of that, he's got a degree of intestinal fortitude on his policies. And, again, he's friends with a lot of people on Wall Street. I know who he's friends with. They got to be telling him about tariffs. And he's obviously telling them to, take a hike.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the American people realized they were being gaslit. At first, it was like, okay, we're going to deal with a little bit higher prices to stick it to Putin. We're coming out of COVID. But then to be told over and over again, the economy was booming. And then people, like you say, they're looking at their monthly budget going, everything became more expensive. And then the gas prices just kept going up and up and up. And then, I just think they couldn't overcome the fact that this became a kitchen table issue. And Trump just kept beating that drum. I'll do everything I can to raise your wages, get better jobs, get the illegals out of the country, even if just shutting down the border. I don't know how, he's going to get that many people out of the country. So I'm grateful they're at least starting with the criminals. Apparently they're not like producing fentanyl or shipping fentanyl as much as they did. I mean, there's been some report. Who was I listening to today? It might have been Victor Hansen Davis. I can't remember, but I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about how the New York Times has gone. One of the big papers went down to the border to hang with fentanyl dealers, and they're afraid of Trump. I mean, he's done some really positive things. He's sending people back. Tom Homan is doing. He's got a big mountain to climb, but he's doing it. You know what I'm saying? They're not backing down. Yeah. And I think Wall Street might be going nuts, and the salons might be hand wringing about their 401ks. By the way, if you didn't see this coming,
I can't feel sorry for traders and for rich people who are in the markets. It's just, if you didn't see this coming a mile away, you got to be a fucking idiot. Excuse my French. I mean, it was, I got defensive. I knew what would happen with tariffs. There's easy ways to get defensive. You sell your stocks, you buy super safe investments, you go into cash. I don't know. This is 101. You can read the Wall Street Journal. I worked for the Money and Investing page for 8-9 years. I can't remember which it was. I think it was in 8 years. And guess what? This is what you did. And I can't believe people didn't know to do this amid this uncertainty. AI was driving the markets to all-time highs. Take some off the table. Yeah. And because you're going into uncertain territory here. I mean, I said it on air, and now everybody's like freaking out. Oh, we didn't think he'd do this. I mean, he said he'd do this.
Do you think maybe the tariffs are a good scapegoat for a market that needed to correct anyway? Market was overpriced?
Well, yeah, it's a scapegoat and it's not a scapegoat. I mean, here's what I would tell you. I read a great book many years ago. It was written by a guy that I wouldn't normally put the word great with, associate great with, is George Soros, although he was a great investor. It was called The Age of Turbulence, and it was all about how do you sort of figure out before the herd gets there what the herd might do, and as it's doing it, how to position yourself in terms of markets, currencies, and things of that nature. I mean, it's Scott Bessent's old boss. Scott Bessent's the Treasury Secretary. And it's all about the herd mentality. And, you know, I'm just giving you a very 30,000, I mean, this was a very intellectual, deep book. But from a 30,000 feet, there's always a triggering mechanism that takes the herd one way. And, you know, I would have bet any amount of money that the triggering mechanism here with Trump would be the minute he really does do a tariff on somebody, which he said he would do day one. So, that was the triggering mechanism. Now, could it have been something else? Yeah. And the reason why it could have been something else, because the markets weren't doing that great. It was 5 stocks that were overvalued. So, I mean, what would take them back to a degree of equilibrium?
Yeah, when you've seen Nvidia run up 500%, can it just go up another 500%? No, probably not. Okay, so your book, Go Woke, Go Broke, dives into the corporate. I want to talk about that for a minute, but I don't know if you saw this, but there was a big fight on the floor in Congress where the first transgender member of Congress from Delaware comes to the floor, and a Republican calls him Mr. because he was born a male, has his male body parts. The Democrats say, you're rude, you're disrespectful, I can't believe that you would break decorum. He says, this is a man dressed up as a woman, and they say, if you're not going to be respectful, then we're not going to go forward. And the guy says, okay, we're calling this. I'm not going to pretend on the floor of Congress that this person isn't a male. Your thoughts on this? This is where it gets really tricky, I think.
Just so you know, I used preferred pronouns in my book. I think if someone wants to be a male and he's a female and vice versa, adults, I kind of like, I'm a libertarian on this. Go for it. You know what I'm saying? If you want to dress like a woman and be a woman, if you identify as a woman, if that's, if there's something in your head that makes you want to go there to live a life where you're not killing yourself, because there is an issue with gender dysmorphia. I mean, there's just no doubt. I mean, that now whether it's a mental illness, a psychological condition, whether it's hormonal, I have no idea. I don't have, but I don't want to get into that with adults, and I think Republicans probably would be better off. And listen, I'm not easy on wokeness or Dylan Mulvaney in this book. If you read it, you know that. But I think there's one thing to be provocative and another thing to be needlessly provocative. Just calling someone out that wants to be known as a woman, making the transition and calling her him and her, Mr. and all that. And that's needlessly provocative. I don't know what you're achieving there. Now, if the said trans woman is now demanding that kids be taught had a trans at a young age, that sexuality gets sort of is proselytized through the school system. I mean, that is where the American people are like, whoa, get lost. And I think, if beer companies are going to start putting trans activists in their ads, the American people are going to like stop. If Target is going to like literally spend a month with sort of flamboyant display of gender, transitioning genders, kids, there were books about kids transitioning that Target was selling. I mean, rainbow colored onesies for kids. I mean, kids. I mean, it's just this is like essentially promoting and proselytizing sexuality to children. I mean, that is not, that's a political movement. That's got to stop. And companies that went there felt the backlash, and they deserve it. They should continue to feel the backlash. But again, I just, for some reason, it rubs me the wrong way just calling someone out like this. Yeah. I'd like to know what it was over. Do you know what it was over? I've been so busy with the market.
Because he called her Mr. So-and-so from Delaware.
But did the trans woman, it's a woman, that was a man that trans a woman, did she introduce a bill to make, keep, women?
No, that I don't know about.
I mean, if this is someone that's like advocating like men transitioning to be women competing in high school sports, which is a complete abomination, or in any sport, then I could say go for it.
I don't even think this person threw a fit. I think someone threw a fit on their behalf. And then that's when the Republican was like, hey, listen, they can be whatever they want. They're an adult, but you can't make me pretend. And then it turned into this big fight. And so the guy just said, I'm canceling the meeting. So
yeah, I think Republicans and the conservatives would be just, take a libertarian live attitude towards this stuff and draw the line on overt proselytizing, because that's not what my book's about. My book is literally about the political movement of wokeness that seeped into corporations, where they became an arm of the progressive movement in advocating lifestyle, DEI, and all these ridiculous things. By the way, I mean, I'm very tough on DEI in this book, but if you go back and sort of unspool where we are in DEI, it began with affirmative action. It was something passed by JFK to basically help poor African Americans get access to federal jobs and contracting on an equal basis. Let's perform some affirmative action to make that happen. So maybe give them a leg up. I think most Americans are not necessarily against that. They would say, well, if there's anybody in this country that deserves a helping hand, well, it might be the sons and daughters of people that suffered under slavery and Jim Crow. Fast forward to now, we have DEI. This isn't about helping poor Black people. This is literally about saying, if you're a rich South American, lesbian, or trans person, you get better jobs over a poor white dude or poor white woman. That's where it went. Now, how we got there is what my book's about. It's a disgusting process. Again, if this was what it was intended to be, no one would care. It was like, what do you got against helping poor Black kids that are Americans? I mean, and giving them a helping hand. They're in horrible neighborhoods. I mean, they're stuck in crappy schools because of the school system. Obviously, I'm for school choice, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about DEI, which sort of negates every skill that you have and reduces the person to their sex and skin color on a whole range of things. It's not about affirmatively helping people get an education or get a federal contract or leveling the playing field. And I think when you start really getting into it, which I did in my book, just how far we came from that founding vision, you do get outraged. I mean, it is horrible what's going on right now. I mean, I know a lot of, I've read enough Thomas Sowell who would say we need no benefit, no affirmative action. I mean, I get it, but I can see what the need for that helping hand to poor Black people, given the history. By the way, these DEI programs are not handed out, namely to, I mean, American-born Blacks are crowded out by the panoply of races and sexes and that get affirmative action benefits here. It's also patently unfair because then all of a sudden you get something known as white adjacent, and Asian Americans get screwed on that equation, particularly at the college level. We should also point out that America of 2025 is a lot different than America of I think it was 1961 or 62, that JFK passed that executive order on affirmative action. We've come a long way. This is not the Jim Crow South. At some point, you got to ask yourself, okay, are these programs working? Obviously, they're not.
Yeah.
If we continue to have a Black underclass in this country, it's DEI is not going to solve that.
Yeah. Well, and I think people are trying to get back to meritocracy, especially jobs that require certain skills and understanding. If you're passing up, I don't care if it's a Black man or a white man or a Black man or a Black woman, for a gay lesbian from Ecuador that doesn't have the skills to do the job, then you're putting people's life in danger. That's where the DEI and the lack of merit really started to worry me. Was like, okay, wait a minute. There are jobs that require education and skill.
And it does, and it is happening. I mean, in these very skillful jobs, DEI watered down merit for intersectionality purposes. I wrote a column about Kamala Harris, and I thought I was on firm ground. I got attacked by a lot of liberals and progressives, but no doubt. I mean, this is someone that was chosen to be vice president not because she was a very good candidate, because she checked a couple of boxes, and then then the Democratic Party was stuck with somebody that couldn't answer a question on policy without descending into word salad. I mean, that's and lost to someone that was indicted 5 times or something like that. I mean, think about that. That's like not easy to do.
Yeah.
And it's all one of the reasons why she did it is because she didn't have the chops to be there. She shouldn't have been there. Yeah. Kamala Harris, was a, I would say, mediocre senator from a state where it was almost a gimme to make her senator because of her intersectionality attributes. I just think in these sort of in skilled positions, you can't really have that. Remember, that's not what affirmative action was back in the day. It was, maybe finding smart minority kids and giving them a shot, giving them a scholarship. I mean, it was not this. Yeah. This is insanity. And that businesses went there and really thought that it was not going to hurt their morale and hurt their bottom line. I mean, I can't believe it. I mean, how do you compete against China if you have DEI for engineers? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Kamala Harris's intersectionality might get her to be the next governor of California. She and Doug Emhoff announced earlier this week that they are going to make their final decision on whether to run for governor at the end of the summer. So we'll see. Might be an interesting story to cover. Charles, I know you're a busy man. Thank you for coming on. I want to put a direct link to Go Woke, Go Broke down below. If people want to follow you online, where can I point them towards?
Oh, on Twitter at C Gasparino. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I break a lot of news on Twitter, so or X, I should say. Still haven't gotten used to saying it, calling it X.
Yeah, me neither. I still call it Twitter all the time.
But anyway, it's X. Elon labeled it, now calls it X, and I'm a frequent tweeter about news.
Okay, great. Well, next time I interview his dad, I'm going to ask him, why is your son so obsessed with the letter X, and try to get to the bottom of it.
That's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, no, I interviewed him once. I'm trying to get it set up for a second time. He's definitely an interesting guy. Well, Charles, thank you so much. I'll put those links down below. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right, Steve. Thanks for having me.